What's a good funeral sermon? It's a sensitive subject. You can probably assume as much, given how sensitive we've become about what that service is actually called. Is it a funeral service, or a memorial service, or a celebration of life service? I think the fact that there are all these different titles for the service only increases the possibility that you'll call it the wrong thing and upset someone when you do. This was not a funeral. This was a celebration of life. I've noticed sometimes at funerals, the picture of the person who has died seems a little airbrushed. Great guy, great husband, great businessman, great sense of humor, great friend. It can go on and on and on. And it actually makes me kind of sad. Because as I'm listening to it, it can seem as if the grace of God is then superfluous. Our guy was so great, he would have never even needed that grace. There's a beautiful part in the funeral liturgy where the leader commends the person who has died and prays, "Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servant, Tom. Acknowledge, we humbly beseech you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming." It's that last part that always gets me. A sinner of your own redeeming. This idea that we could be having a funeral for the most decorated black belt sinner there ever was, and the grace of God would cover that up too. But it's hard to talk about this or think about this, so I think maybe that's why we tend to end up with those airbrushed sermons. So I wonder if we were having a service today, funeral liturgy and homily for Peter, the main character in today's gospel reading, what would that sermon look like? Is this on? Is this on? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here today for this funeral service for Peter. I know how he touched all of you in really special ways. I'm sure you all have such deep memories of Peter, how smart and funny and outgoing and brilliant and wise he was. Do you remember that time when, I remember, I was with Peter and we were doing our research, and it was after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of study, and at one moment Peter snaps his hands and he says, "I've got it. This is the Christ. He is the Christ." And this discovery was just a breakthrough. Everybody had been searching, but Peter was the one who found it. And everything that followed, the MacArthur, the Nobel, the endowed chair, the patent. If any of you have ever been to church on a Sunday to worship Christ, you can thank Peter. It was his idea first. So there'd be enough material and praiseworthy bits to round out a standard 15-minute funeral homily for Peter. We could tell some fishing stories, all the fish that Peter caught, how he would be so silly on the boat, how he jumped off the boat that one time without even taking his clothes off. But I think that some of us who knew Peter well would start to shift a little uneasily, because we'd know that there's more to Peter than what the preacher is telling us. We'd know that Peter was no saint. Well, he was a saint, but you know what I mean. There were good things and bad things about Peter. So here's another story about Peter. After that breakthrough discovery, where he's in the lab and he figures out that it is the Christ, after all the accolades, after the fruits of Peter's discovery extended to every street corner, every couple blocks, in every town, in every country, in every part of the world, people were gathering on Sunday mornings to pay homage to the power and majesty of what Peter had found. And Christ himself went on a business trip to see one of Peter's franchises. And Christ walked in and sat in the back, and saw the people in this place, a place that maybe looked a little bit like this. Their eyes were closed. They were swaying back and forth. You are the Christ, they were saying. You are the Christ, just like Peter had said at first at Caesarea Philippi. And the services would move along, and they'd always end so triumphantly. There'd be a little tension in a guitar piece at the end, but then powerful chords and drum blasts would finish the service. The takeaway of the experience for the worshipers would be, we have won again. We always win. This is how it is. And it feels good. So the worshipers walk back to their cars every week after church, ready to crush another week of work and life, and then come back to this place and refuel and feel good on another Sunday all over again. Jesus meets Peter in the narthex after the service. Peter's quite proud. There were so many people there. Peter walks up to Jesus and says, look what I've got going here. I've added 30 people, 300 people, 3,000 members just in the past year. How about that, Jesus? Jesus takes a long pause. He'd been awfully quiet the whole service. Peter had noticed this and been disappointed. Jesus hadn't once raised his hands during the singing. He hadn't even closed his eyes during the prayers. Peter, Jesus says, looking at him, do you remember how I told you I was going to have to suffer and die? Do you remember that night we were in the garden? I was praying and I was afraid and you kept falling asleep. Do you remember when that big group of guys came who was way stronger than us and how there was nothing that we could do and how they just took me away? Remember how you followed afterward and people asked you if you knew me and you just shook your head? Remember how they stripped me and beat me and hung me on a tree? Remember how when I was hanging there, nobody could tell any difference between me and the two criminals who were hanging next to me? How no one could tell any difference between me and men who have hung from trees in all of time? Men who've sat in chairs and been executed. Do you remember any of this, Peter? What are you doing here? What is all this constant celebrating? This ridiculous successfulness? If we were reading today's Bible story for the very first time, not in a church, if we were unacquainted with Jesus, if we were only searching for salvation, which I think humankind has been doing for all of time, I think we could read this as the story of the history of an idea. Peter's declaration about Jesus is this breakthrough idea. And when I hear it, I think, okay, Peter, good for you. We've always known this about Jesus. It sort of feels like celebrating the invention of the wheel when you already have 160,000 miles on your 2004 Toyota Sienna. It's obvious, to me at least, that Jesus is the Christ. But it's groundbreaking in the telling here, because it seems as if those who are closest to Jesus didn't know this. So Jesus commends Peter on this discovery, and he says, flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, Peter, which I take to mean you have discovered something. You've done something, seen something that has never before been seen. You've had a revelation. A revelation? That word's a little too supernatural and woo-woo, I think. In our time, it's economists and business people and entrepreneurs who are the high priests. So I think we need to sub out the word revelation for a better word. Invention. How about that? Peter, you have had an invention. There's a translation for 2023. Back in 1968, Spencer Silver was working at the 3M headquarters in Maplewood, Minnesota. His goal? Find an adhesive that was so strong you could use it for aircraft construction. It wasn't going well, though. All that Spencer Silver had created was an adhesive that would stick, and then unstick, and then stick, and then unstick, and then stick, and unstick. Meanwhile, in 1968, Spencer Silver's friend Art Fry was singing in his church choir. Art Fry's mission? Try and find a bookmark that he can keep in his hymnal so he can find his favorite hymns. It wasn't going well, though, because every bookmark that Art Fry put in his hymnal kept falling out. So he'd put a bookmark in there and it would fall out, and then he'd probably have to lean forward and look through the pews in front of him looking for the bookmark. And this was okay because most of the sermons were dull and boring, but it was a little distracting. At the beginning of our reading today at Caesarea Philippi, we could say that Simon Peter has a mission: to invent an adhesive, an idea for Christ that is so strong and solid you could build an airplane out of it. So strong and solid that it will always keep things in place, keep our faith in place, keep our certainties in place. You are the Christ, Peter says. And the moment he said it, it must have sounded so good. He must have known how strong it sounded. He must have known how people would like the sound of it and how it would stick. And it stuck. There are still lots of churches. We still worship this Christ, this God who is worthy to be praised, who is all-knowing and all-powerful, the protector from every danger, the answer to every question, the healer of every ill. That's how the marketing campaign goes. And people buy in. It's the Christ that I want to worship, who will keep everything in place for me, give me every answer, every certainty, heal everything that is wrong with me. If I can have this strong adhesive, all my worries will go away. My relationships will be consistent. My career will be solid. My retirement will be secure. My body will not break down. Christ so solidly adhered to my heart for me. That's the faith I want, I think. Faith that can never be unstuck. But then comes a little breeze. Doesn't seem like much. You're getting older. Maybe you meet someone who has different beliefs than you do. And their beliefs are wrong. You're sure of it. And you intend to tell them. You intend to show them how well adhered Christ is to your heart. And the moment you are beginning to show them your faith, the winds have really picked up. And you look down, and it's not there. The faith you thought you had has become unstuck. And you keep getting older. Your body is breaking down. You are sick. You will not talk to your kids. Your parents will not talk to you. This or that relationship has ended. And you're looking for some strong adhesive that could just glue all these broken pieces back together. Some strong glue that could keep your life, your beliefs, your certainties in place. Where is that faith that you once had with Peter on Caesarea Philippi? The faith you had on that mission trip when you were a teenager? That faith you had when you did that couples Bible study when you were first married and still in love? Where did that go? If Art Fry were here and it was 1968, he'd be sitting with our choir and we wouldn't be able to see his head because it would be beneath the pew in front of him because he would be looking for those bookmarks that keep falling out. His glasses are almost off his face and he has an idea. What about that not so sticky substance my friend Spencer Silver has been creating? What if I put that on a piece of paper and put it in my hymnal? I bet that would stay there. So that's what Art did. He put a Post-it note in his hymnal. Thank God our inventions don't go according to plan. You are the Christ, Peter tells Jesus. And Peter wants Jesus to be what he thinks he needs. He wants certainty, comfort, power, security, something that can be sold and bought into very easily, something that could bring in 30 new members, 300 new members, 3,000 new members, 300 million new members. That's what he wants. That's what I want. I think that's what I want, but that's not what God gives us. God doesn't give us something strong or solid, something that will always be in the same place, something that will answer the same question the same way all the time. Instead of an adhesive that can never be moved, God gives us Christ's abiding presence. A presence that accompanies you wherever you're going in life. You can stick it on to your failing body, your failing relationships, your doubts. And then you can unstick it and stick it on to wherever you're headed next. And the message on that note, which you can carry with you everywhere, that always remains the same. It's what we heard at the end of the reading today. Get up. Do not be afraid. I am with you. It's a great invention. No, it's a revelation.